This is Cruise Radio.
I cruise a lot, and I always sail with travel insurance. You should, too. Get a free quote today at tripinsurance.com.
Broadcasting from the tripinsurance.com studios in Jacksonville, Florida.
This is
Cruise Radio.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Doug Parker. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Cruise Radio. Very happy to have you here. A review of the latest refurbishment of Norwegian Joy coming up later on this week's show. But first, staff writer Richard Sims, welcome back, buddy.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, how packed was Disney?
Scary packed, quite honestly. There was one night when we were down at Disney Springs, that it was so crowded. We had gone down to see the drone show, and it was so crowded that I actually started to have low-level panic, and we left before the show because it was too bad. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you had a good time other than that down there, and you're back with cruise news and a lot of news on deck today. Kicking things off with a very big change coming to Carnival Cruise Line.
I don't know about you, but I definitely didn't see this one coming, and maybe we should have. So over the last few years, Carnival Corporation, which encompasses, as most of you know, a really big variety of cruise lines, including P&O, AIDA, and others, they've been putting a whole lot of their eggs into the Carnival Cruise Line basket. It's interesting. A lot of people don't realize that Carnival Cruise Line and Carnival Corporation are two different things. Carnival Corporation is the big mothership company, and Carnival Cruise Line is the biggest cruise line in the world, but it is a division of Carnival Cruise Line. So that's where some people get confused. As we're talking about this story, we're going to be talking about both. So, you kind of have to keep that straight in your head. So we saw several ships from Costa being folded into the Carnival Cruise Line fleet. Again, they took them from Costa, which is the mothership, Carnival Corporation, and they brought them into Carnival Cruise Line. And now comes news that the parent company is basically shutting down P&O Australia's division. And that's going to impact three ships, the Pacific Adventure and the Pacific Encounter, both of which will be rebranded as Carnival ships, and the Pacific Explorer, which they say is going to be leaving the ship. We don't know whether that means they're going to sell it or it's going to be scrapped. I tend to lean toward the latter because that ship, the third ship that we're talking about here, is about 5 years older than the other two. So that puts it in like the 25, 30 year range. So, I kind of feel like maybe they're thinking scrap it, but we'll have to see. One thing's important to note, this does not impact P&O UK, which is a completely separate brand under the corporate umbrella. Also, Carnival Corporation is going to continue to have a big presence in Australia. These ships are still going to sail out of Australia. They're just not going to do it under the P&O brand. They're going to do it as Carnival. This is all part of a really much larger plan involving Carnival Cruise Line, because to give you some idea of how important that division is to Carnival Corporation, the mothership is going to expand its capacity by about 2%. When you look at the overall capacity from 2019 to 2028, Carnival Cruise Line's growth in that same period is going to be about 50%. That's taking into account the ships that have already been brought from other lines. That's taking into account these new ships that are being brought over. And it's also taking into account they just ordered 2 new Excel class ships, which that's, right now we have the Mardi Gras, the Jubilee, and the Celebration. They've just ordered 2 more of those giant ships, which will join the fleet in 2027 and 2028, respectively. So long story short, this very, very big cruise company is about to become a whole lot bigger.
Yeah, it'll give them 29 ships by the end of this, and also it'll have Royal Caribbean at 29 ships as well, and then, of course, as Royal and obviously Carnival bring in more, they'll go up, but it'll put them neck and neck, it is interesting, though, right, because they got rid of those 6 ships during the shutdown, but still, just outpacing,
Right. And of course, the ships that they got rid of were much smaller than the newer ships they're bringing over. They're even smaller than, the Costa ships that they brought over. So they've completely eclipsed the capacity that they lost when they sold those ships and have just added more and more and more. And, the clearly the demand for cruising is there because they wouldn't be doing this. They wouldn't be moving these ships into the Carnival fleet if there wasn't a demand for it. Their ships are sailing at, anywhere from 99 to 104% capacity. So clearly there is definitely a need for these ships.
Well, maybe their retired ship, Pacific Explorer, could go over to Villa V for their Villa V Odyssey cruise.
Yeah, at this point, I can't help but feel bad for people who've packed up all their belongings and made plans to live on this ship. It was originally supposed to sail on May 15th out of Southampton. And now this is one of those ships where, you buy a residency and you live on it for the next 3 years. And a lot of people have been very excited about this. A lot of various people in the blogosphere have been very excited about it. And, they worked with the company to give away free cruises and all this kind of stuff. But like I said, they were supposed to originally sail on May 15th out of Southampton. Then the company said, whoops, we're going to sail on May 30th out of Belfast. So not only was the date changed, but so was the point of embarkation, which is, kind of difficult for all those people who packed up all their stuff and came to Southampton planning on getting in a ship, then had to go to Belfast. Well, guess what? The ship still hasn't sailed. It was supposed to sail on May 30th. As you may have seen by looking at the calendar, that date has now come and gone, and still the ship hasn't sailed. They're saying now that it will sail on June 15th. Why? Because every time they inspect the ship, a new problem pops up. They've had several different issues. They had some gray water issues, and they had some kind of propeller issue. Now, Doug, I'm about to really earn my title as Cruise Radio's resident cynic because mark me and mark me well. If this ship sails on June 15th, I will drink clam juice, possibly the most disgusting thing on the planet, live during the next time we record after June 15th, because I just don't believe that ship is going to sail on June 15th.
The back and forth battle between Juneau and Alaska and cruise lines finally has some closure.
Towns like Juneau are in a really tough position because on the one hand, they need the money that tourists in general and cruise passengers in particular bring in. On the other, they don't want their towns to be overrun. It's understandable. If you live in this town, you don't want the entire town to be packed every minute of every day. So last year, an agreement was reached which limited the number of ships to 5 per day being allowed to visit. Now, another bill has been passed which says that starting in 2026, they will only allow 16,000 passengers to disembark in Juneau on any given day. Well, not really any given day. Saturday is a different day. On Saturday, they will only allow 12,000. So that's a start. Now, according to local officials, the hope is that over the next few years, they can sort of expand some of the infrastructure and some of the things that are offered and find ways to handle these ever-growing crowds of tourists. And that they've also sort of agreed to meet with the cruise lines once a year to look at changes that have been made, changes that need to be made, should they adjust the capacity levels. So everybody is kind of working together on this because, the cruise lines don't want people who go there to have a bad experience. They don't want them to go there and have to stand in line, 12 hours at the Crab Shack or whatever. So everybody is kind of working together. There are, however, some people who still are not happy with the agreement that's been reached. In fact, there's a group that is trying to gather enough signatures now that they would be able to pass, or at least bring before the board, a resolution which would declare Saturdays cruise ship free, meaning 6 days a week, the ships would still be able to come in at the current capped capacity, but on Saturday, there would be no ships allowed. It's interesting because let's just talk some facts about Juneau. Juneau saw a record-breaking 1.6 million visitors in 2023. That was up from 1.2 million the previous high. And obviously, one of the reasons that there's been such a huge growth in capacity is that, we had the shutdown for an extended period of time. And so when people came back, they're not only wanting to do a cruise, but they wanted to do a bucket cruise to Alaska. And with all the concerns about things like global warming and the environment and all that, people like me, I have a cruise booked next year in Alaska. I'm like, I want to go now because 5 years from now, there may not be glaciers, so let's go. So you're seeing more and more ships doing more and more sailings into Alaska. And Juneau collects money, remember, from those passengers. So they definitely want the people coming because they want that tax money. But apparently they think they kind of want to limit the amount of money. They get 3 separate taxes that are included in the cruise fare. So it breaks down to there's $5 per passenger from the state's commercial passenger vessel fee, $3 from a port development fee, and another $5 for the city's maritime passenger fee. So that is the taxes that you pay when you visit. Obviously, that is a lot of money. That is a lot of money going into Juneau, and it's earmarked for certain purposes. We hope they actually use it for that. But they clearly want to keep that money coming in, but maybe sort of cap how many people are allowed to visit each year.
A Royal Caribbean ship was late coming to port because of weather, and lots of people missed their flights. What's up?
We've talked before about the fact that the side of a ship is basically a gigantic sail. So, when you have heavy winds, it's pushing against the side of the ship, and a sail has some give. You can adjust it, but you can't do that with the side of a ship. It is a solid thing, and so winds are going to impact it. In this case, it was Royal Caribbean's Quantum of the Sea. It was at the tail end of a journey, and it was heading back to Seattle, where it was going to disembark the current passengers, and new passengers would embark. But the wind was so high, it was around 40 knots, that it was a little bit dangerous for the ship to go into port on its own, so it needed tugboats to help. Unfortunately, all of the tugboats were unavailable at the time. So it took about 7 hours before the tugboats could get there and help the ship safely navigate to the port. So they wound up docking around 1:45, which was a delay of about 7 hours from when it was supposed to dock, which means, of course, they then had to get all the passengers off the ship, and all the new passengers who were coming on the ship, who thought they were getting on about 7-8 hours earlier. That meant that the embarkation process was delayed, and that means that their sail away was delayed. Ultimately, everything went fine. They got the people off the ship, they got the new group on the ship, and the ship set sail. But everything was delayed because of this high wind factor.
This next story, it could have started on a cruise ship, but it definitely ended on an airplane.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a mystery. A flight leaving Vancouver was heading to Houston, and it turned into kind of a nasty, gross situation because reportedly several dozen passengers began vomiting. It wasn't particularly because of bumpy skies either. Out of the 163 people who were on that flight, about 75 had just disembarked from a cruise. So now there's no confirmation of this, but it sounds as if, and it certainly seems safe to assume that the ship was probably the source of this gastrointestinal distress. It was Royal Caribbean's Radiance of the Sea is the ship it was the only ship in port that day. So it seems likely that it was passengers from that ship. And let's not forget that over the last month or so, that ship has had a couple of outbreaks of neurovirus or some other kind of gastrointestinal issue. Now, this is the part of the show where I point out that neurovirus is far more common on land than it is on sea, and that the only reason it's so closely associated with cruise ships is that they, unlike other places where you have outbreaks, have rules in effect which require even relatively small outbreaks to be reported to the CDC. Also, mainstream media loves nothing more than to write big headlines about, passengers stuck on ship sick. That dates all the way back to the Carnival Triumph and the poop ship and all that. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had the ship in Japan. So they love this kind of thing. And neurovirus feeds right into that because all they have to do is keep an eye on CDC records and they can see whenever there's a neurovirus outbreak and make a big, bold story out of it. The ship eventually underwent an extensive cleaning, and the airplane that had all the sick people on it was pulled out of service and missed like 3 flights so that they could do a deep cleaning. We may never know for sure exactly what the root cause was, but it seems fairly safe to assume that it did start on a cruise ship and probably on Radiance. And poor Radiance has had a rough go of it.
And our question of the week comes from Ken. Send yours in, Doug at cruiseradio.net. Ken writes, "Hey, Doug, I'm curious about Richard's take on that recent story about the Carnival passengers who had her $15,000 cruise canceled without her knowledge. I know you've already spoke about this, but does he think that Carnival should refund her money?"
Well, that's a great question. I like getting questions directly to me. That's fun. Here's the thing. I do think Carnival should just hand over the money because this is a public relations nightmare. I'm a big believer that when you're a big company, whether it's, Amazon or Carnival Cruise Line, if there is a story out there that you can make go away for a relatively small amount of money, and let's face it, to Carnival Cruise Line, $15,000 is nothing, absolutely nothing. If you can make it go away, do everything in your power to go away. If you can make it not only go away, but become a positive story, that's even better. Reach out to this woman and say, "Oh my God, we know this wasn't your fault. We're so sorry. This is a terrible thing that's happened to you. We are going to, bring you on board, and we're going to, sit you at the captain's table, and we're going to do free drink packages for your entire family." Whatever you can do to make this right. It's important to note that there seems to be no indication that this was Carnival's fault. If anything, this is sort of a morality story about what to post on social media and what not to post. In one of the news stories, I think it was on Good Morning America, they gave a really good piece of advice, which is post where you've been, not where you're going. In other words, don't post about your trip until you're back from it, because you don't want to let people know that your house is sitting empty. In this case, the woman in question seems to have made an even bigger mistake. She not only posted about her trip, but at some point, either she or her husband posted something on social media that had, the booking number on it. So it had their name, it had their booking number, it had the date that they were supposed to go. So it was very easy for somebody to just pick up the phone, call Carnival, say, "Hey, I'm Tiffany. I'm calling about booking number XYZ. I want to cancel this." The big question, and I don't know that we'll ever get an answer to this, is why someone did this. It feels so personal. Like, I have to think, if it was me, I'd be questioning all my friends. I'd be doing like the final scene in a Murder, She Wrote episode, gather everybody together and question them all, because that's such a personal thing to cancel someone's vacation. You get absolutely nothing out of it. It's not like you get the $15,000 that this person is out. All you're doing is canceling somebody else's vacation. That's highly personal. So, Tiffany, take my advice. Gather everybody and find out who in your circle did it. And Carnival, take my advice. Make this right.
On the other hand, though, should Carnival just take the L and take the bad press? Just, because they did give her the $10,000 in future cruise credits. Just seems like something like this could just open up a can of worms for opportunists, as well as people who are trying to take advantage and saying, "Well, hey, I couldn't go on the cruise. Someone else canceled it." I don't know. It just seems like it's a mess either direction.
I look at the very specific circumstances here that they posted this information online. I can't just call and cancel someone. Again, there has to be a reason for it. I suppose if someone wanted to cancel their cruise at the last minute and didn't have cruise insurance, they might think, "Oh, you know what I'll do? I'll cancel it and then I'll pretend someone else canceled it." I suppose that could happen. I think the odds of it are so small that it's definitely worth it to me to just make this a good story, make it go away. I'm usually the one who takes the bad side. I'm usually the devil's advocate or the cynic. But in this case, I'm going to let my heart lead and say, make it right.
Well, let's do this. Let's see what the listeners think. Email your thoughts in, Doug at cruiseradio.net. We'll read some of them on the show next week. Welcome back, Richard. Thanks again for being on.
As always, glad to be here.
Have a question or a comment for the show? Yeah! Send an email or voice memo to doug@cruiseradio.net.
A big question we get at Cruise Radio is, how do I know if I need trip insurance? Simple answer. If you're getting on a plane, taking a road trip, or getting on a cruise ship, you need to have travel insurance. Hey, it's Doug Parker from my friends at tripinsurance.com. Not only does tripinsurance.com protect your vacation investment, but it also gives you peace of mind in case anything were to go wrong on your trip. How do they do it? They offer 3 different types of trip insurance policies. Good, better, and best. One policy for every vacation budget. But it doesn't just stop there. They're up to 40% lower when you shop around on other comparison sites. Plus, tripinsurance.com offers 24-hour customer support before, during, and after your trip, online claims assistance, and travel alerts to let you know what's going on at your destination. But find out for yourself. Check out tripinsurance.com.
The world is constantly changing. Your place for news is still the same. Online and on demand at cruiseradio.net.
Gray Faust is the executive editor at cruisecritic.com. She just returned from the newly refurbished Norwegian Joy, and she's here to talk all about it. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Doug. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Or talk to you.
Yeah, good. It was good seeing you a couple of weeks ago there on Carnival Firenze. You and Don, they're out of Los Angeles. I believe when we were on that ship, you were just getting ready to go on Norwegian Joy.
That's right. I pretty much went from Carnival almost straight to Norwegian. It's an interesting transition to see 2 large ships like that kind of back to back.
For context, this ship was launched for the Chinese market in 2017. 2018, after a year over there, they said, we're going to redeploy this over to the U.S. 2019, it gets redeployed and starts service on the West Coast. And then recently, early 2024, it had another dry dock. Is my timeline correct?
Yeah, your timeline there is correct, Doug. What's interesting is all the refurbishments that this ship had to go through during all those iterations. I mean, when it came out in 2017 for China, it was really kind of heralded as this is a ship for this audience. And Norwegian really invested a lot of time in making it very specific for the Chinese market. You know, they had an expanded casino, they had expanded shopping areas, they had done some things with the pool deck, which will come into play as we talk more about this ship. And they really came out with it for the Chinese. Well, then when they had to pull it back to North America, they had to redo it again. And so really it almost had a complete rebuild to make it better for the US market. In terms of like adding the observation lounge, in terms of, changing the restaurants up, getting rid of things like a tea garden and changing the restaurants and all that. So, and then the ship just had a very large refurb this year. And so it really is a ship that's gone through a lot of iterations, and it's very interesting. It's just a little bit of an outlier from those other Breakaway and Breakaway Plus ships.
It's actually kind of funny because you just did Firenze and now you're on Norwegian Joy talking about that one. So 2 ships built for the Chinese market, but now back in the U.S. market.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's common with these ships is that, and this is something I think any cruiser out there who's looking at one of these ships, if you're starting to read about it and you hear that it's had a stint in China, one thing that's going to be different about these ships, honestly, it's going to be the pool deck. That's where you're really going to see any of the differences or any of that legacy of being a Chinese ship, in that in general, and this is again a generalization, cruisers in China, they avoid the sun a little bit more. So those ships do not have very extensive sun decks or pool decks. It's just not really part of the culture there to go sunbathing. So no matter how much these cruise lines renovate these ships that were originally for China, the pool decks are always going to be somewhat smaller. And the pools are always going to, you're not going to have those large kind of Lido deck, oval pools with lots of sun chairs around them that you would see on a typical cruise ship. So it's interesting because both Carnival Firenze and Norwegian Joy, that's one thing they had in common. And it's because they have this original purpose of being built for China.
Obviously, we know what happened after COVID, but these ships started coming over, well, at least the Norwegian Joy before COVID. So did the Chinese demand just soften? Was there too many ships being built for that market? Because if you recall, about 10 years ago over at Sea Trade in Miami, that was the big thing. We're all going to China.
I think, the excitement of the Chinese market is there because it's such a huge potential market for cruising and travel overall. But, there's different kind of they have different financial issues sometimes, that they're on a different cycle sometimes than the rest of the world. Certainly COVID really crashed that market for cruising, and to the point where cruise lines are just even now starting to think, well, maybe we want to go back there. But really it was sort of, they overestimated the demand. And then also I think it's interesting that the demand in other places came up. And in the case of Norwegian Joy, it was partially that they saw how well Norwegian Bliss did in Alaska. I think at first they were wondering, oh, is this ship going to work in Alaska? And Norwegian Bliss, with that huge observation lounge, really was a very big success in that region. And so they almost immediately started thinking, hey, can we bring Joy back over to, get that market and get those full sailings?
Great context there. That makes sense for sure. Have you sailed Joy recently?
I hadn't, no.
Okay.
I had toured it, but I had not sailed it.
As you mentioned, the ship received a lot of enhancements, including staterooms, the spa area, the Vibe Beach Club, of course, just your typical dry dock stuff as well. In your opinion, and I'm only asking this kind of going off script here, but do you think we're going to see more of this with future dry docks and renovations across all brands?
Well, certainly, as we know, and as you've been documenting, as well as our publication, demand is really up right now. And so I do think that the lines are going to be looking, as they do these refurbs, how can we get more cabins in here? Now, one thing that's interesting with the Norwegian Joy refurb, it wasn't just adding more cabins, they also added more solo cabins, which is also that's part of their sort of value as a line, that they did want to have some solo, more accommodations for solo travelers. So some of the cabins they added were also for solos, which is interesting because that doesn't then affect the overall capacity number as much as you might think. But in general, yeah, I think this is going to be a trend we're going to see on refurbs, where they're going to be, the lines are going to be looking for spaces to put more travelers because they're just seeing this demand.
Speaking of solo staterooms, does this ship have one of the, I can't remember, this has saved my life. I sailed it back in 2019, but it was all a blur, to be honest with you. Does this ship have one of those solo stateroom complexes?
And this is where Norwegian Joy is a little bit different. Again, it's an outlier from a lot of the Norwegian ships in that it did not have that special solo lounge that you see on all the other Norwegian new builds. Again, that was because the Chinese market, it's not really something that's done. The traveler over there tends to be much more multi-generational, where in multi-generational, the point where you see the grandparents, the kids, and then multiple, the kids. I mean, it very much is everybody, together. That's really not something that would be for the Chinese market. So what they've done for Norwegian Joy to add solo cabins is they're not clustered in one area around a lounge like you find on some of the other ships. But they have put them on the ship. What's nice about them is they have some balcony cabins, some solo balcony cabins, which is somewhat unusual on a mainstream ship. So that's something that solo travelers might want to look for. So it is a little bit different focus on solo travelers than you see on the other Norwegian ships, but it still is. I think it says something to the fact that just demographics are changing, and a lot of people do want to cruise by themselves, or that's just their preferred. They don't want to share a room with somebody, that kind of thing. So
I can relate to that. So, and speaking of cabins, they added some more cabins in the observation area. Did that take away from any of the space in the observation area? Because that was a very popular area.
They did. And it was the upper level of the observation lounge. So when you walk through the bottom level, which is honestly where most people spend most of their time, that's where the little buffet is. That's where all those, you get the seats with the big, views outside. You really wouldn't notice much of a difference if you were on the lower level of the observation lounge. It pretty much looks almost exactly the same. So I think that they really did a good job at this, because what they took out was on the upper level, which a lot of times on those observation lounges in general, those spaces are not used as much because people just gravitate to where the bars are, right? The bars and Starbucks and all that kind of thing are on the lower level. That's where the people are. So you just really don't notice much of a difference. And the cruisers I talked to felt that that was a really good renovation, that they really made it, they kept the integrity of the observation lounge and how it's used on that ship without really, and still were able to add cabins.
I never realized that was 2 decks to begin with. So good to hear that, and that no space was taken away. And then another area that was transformed was the virtual reality area, the arcade and what was it called? Galaxy Pavilion?
They did, yeah. And they made it into the thermal suite, which I'm going to tell you, I've been in a lot of thermal suites because I'm definitely a spa girly. And, this is the best thermal suite I've seen at sea.
Mhm.
It kind of took everything that I've seen in other thermal suites and put it all together, like the best of best of. And in fact, I thought the thermal suite, it's now the largest one on any Norwegian ship. And the thermal suite sort of way they did it on Joy is actually, I think, better than what they've done on their newer ships, Norwegian Prima, Norwegian Viva, because it's at the back, it's at the edge of the ship. You have great views to relax. They have over 40 of those heated ceramic loungers, so everybody has a lounger. They have a lot of other seating that isn't heated that you could just sit there with a book and relax and look outside. And then the rooms themselves, the different treatments that different things you can do, like the salt room, the snow room, the steam room, and the sauna. They're spacious. Like you don't ever feel like you're cheek to cheek with anybody.
Right.
And in this case, that's important, right? And because I hate a thermal suite where you feel like you're cramped because, you're in your robe and your bathing suit. It's just kind of icky if you're too close together. So here everything's really spaced out. It's really well done. There's lots of room. The only little flaw on my trip is that the whirlpool there the jets weren't working. I understand they're going to be fixing that. So that was a little bit of a bummer, but they did give people a little bit of a refund back on their thermal spa pass for the week. But in general, this is such a nice use of space. It's really beautiful. Spa lovers are really going to enjoy that space. I certainly did.
It's interesting you mentioned the size, and it is interesting. I just covered the Carnival Legend refurbishment, and one of the areas they did was like the steam room and sauna, just kind of new tiles and flooring and stuff in there. And now, granted, the one on the Legend is free, not an upcharge, not part of a thermal suite or anything like that. But if we're talking just like collectively of these spaces at sea, Norwegian may have some of the largest, at least that I've been into. And then I see you were in this Four Senses chair. Talk to us about this.
The Four Senses chair. This was something, they have 4 of them, and you sit in it, and it's kind of like a meditation chair, and it's not heated like the ceramic lounges, and you're kind of in it. It changes color, and you get little like bird sounds, like kind of woodland sounds, and a little bit of what they say is an aromatherapy experience. I couldn't really smell it. I'm not sure if all my senses were quite engaged in the Four Senses chair, I have to say, but it was kind of fun to see it there. And again, people who love spas love anything new and anything trendy in the spa world. So it was kind of fun to check it out. I have a feeling they're not going to be replacing those ceramic lounges with Four Senses chairs because they just were not as popular as the ceramic loungers. But it's always nice to see when lines are kind of on the forefront of spa type of stuff. And one thing that I really noticed with this is that one thing that's really popular in the fitness and health community is cold plunges. And they had 2 within their whole spa complex there. They had 2 ways that people could kind of have that cold plunge, that colder experience, which, part of the whole thermal experience is that you get hot, but then you also want to cool yourself off too. And so not only did they have a snow room, which I believe Norwegian was one of the first mainstream cruise lines to have a snow room, and this snow room is quite large, but they also have that cold plunge pool, and that cold plunge pool is really cold. Maybe some people who are used to cold plunges could get all the way in. I could only get like my ankle in, but that is something that's very trendy right now, the cold plunge. And it was really nice to see that was included in this thermal suite, because again, people that love these kind of spa amenities, they're always looking for the next new thing. So I think the Four Senses chair is sort of part of that. It's always good to see the lines expanding their horizons on this.
The cold plunge is interesting. I was just watching a piece on Kenny Chesney. He's on tour with Zach Brown, and both of them travel with their own cold plunge pools, and they do that before their show, and it really ignites them, which I guess rightfully so when you shock your body like that. But I never realized how popular they were. Like the snow rooms have been around for a while, but I don't think I'm ready to take that step yet.
Well, you can try to put your feet. I mean, my husband, Don, thought he was going to try it. And then, he did not get further. He did not get further than his ankles. I mean, and that was the same with me. It's just a little too cold for me. That being said, the snow room was really refreshing. I like how they did that. It was just a really nice experience. And again, it was larger. Like sometimes on these, I've seen other little snow areas on ships, and sometimes it's just really like a bucket of almost like that shaved ice sort of thing. Whereas this was really like a whole room that was chilly, and you could go in and kind of cool off after you'd been in that sauna. It was really lovely.
Well, let's transition from cold to hot, and we'll go to the pool deck where the Lido pool is. And as you mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of pool space out there. So that being said, during the dry dock, were any pools installed, if that's even a thing with the general arrangement of the ship?
This is where I think they're not able to do the refurb quite that much. And this is where Norwegian Joy definitely looks different than almost any other Norwegian ship that people would be used to. That main pool area is mostly, it's mostly a courtyard. It's mostly open, and not a lot of real estate dedicated to the pools themselves. There are 2 pools that are in separate corners. One is designated for adults only. The other, quote, main pool is what it really doesn't seem that large at all. I mean, I'm trying to sort of make it a comparison here. It is just really not a lot of real estate dedicated to that main pool. That being said, it's really sort of the family pool. I do think Norwegian Joy did a good job of separate. They only have these 2 small pools. And they did a good job of making one for kids, with a lifeguard and everything, and one for adults. And it was really enforced, honestly, or whether it was enforced by, I didn't really see anybody, I guess, from the line enforcing it, but it was self-enforced, where really the adults who were there by themselves or with each other kind of stayed in one pool. The kids really stayed in the other pool. That main pool is near the water slides and near the water park. So really kind of all that family Lido activity was contained in one area, whereas the other area had the adults. And I thought that was a good way to kind of make the most of this somewhat odd pool deck.
Like Carnival Forense was the same way, very courtyard vibe as you walk through that Lido deck area. But if you wanted the fun in the sun on that ship, you would go towards the back, which on this ship, it's called Spice H2O. Is that where, like, if you want to, get the sun and get the refreshing pool and everything, would you hang out there instead of going right there to that mid-Lido deck pool?
Well, it's interesting. Spice H2O has I have never seen a hot tub on a ship like this. It has a 39-person hot tub.
Wow.
And it is undercover. So it is not really fun in the sun. Again, I have never seen a hot tub this large. And it was often full. And other than that is really the only water feature that Spice H2O has. It does have a lot of sun loungers, and it has a bar out there. And it is 18 plus. That being said, I've never also seen as many chair hogs as I've seen on the Spice H2O area. It was really like, you'd get out there at 8 a.m. and pretty much every lounger would have a towel on it already, and the people were somewhat nowhere to be found. It was really interesting. Like, that's allegedly for adults, and they were perhaps showing the most childish behavior. Spice H2O, that's where they had some of the theme parties too, which I do think Norwegian does fantastic theme parties. It's a really fun area, and of course it does have a bar. But it's really not a place to go for any quiet, because that 39-person hot tub, seemed pretty chatty.
It's like a cruise ship mullet, chill in the front and party in the back.
Exactly.
As far as the Vibe Beach Club, now that was another addition during the dry dock. Did this ship actually have a Vibe Beach Club before it went in, and this was more of an expansion of the existing?
They had one already, but it was only on one level. And what was there up there before was the laser tag area for families. And so there is a theme here. If you're, if people are remembering all of this, there's a theme here, and that they got rid of the Galaxy Pavilion and the laser tag area, both of which drew families. Those did, there was a fee for those, just like there's a fee for the thermal suite and for the Vibe. But it's kind of a one-time only fee. Like, you're not going to play laser tag every single day. Mm-hmm. And you might not be in the Galaxy Virtual Reality Pavilion every single day. But when you buy a pass to either the thermal suite or to Vibe, it's for the week. So it's definitely a revenue move to do this. It's also a more adults thing. There are also additions that cater more to adults, because both of those areas are for 18 plus. That being said, again, Vibe was one of my other favorite places on the entire ship. I loved the expanded Vibe Beach Club. I definitely thought it was worth the $250 per person weekly fee. It was such a quiet oasis from the rest of the ship and the crazy lounge, chair hogs and just whole crowds that you see everywhere else. You had really great bar service there. People were friendly. The hot tubs were a reasonable size. It seemed like the people got out of the hot tubs more often than they did maybe in the Spice H2O1. It just seemed like a more really an oasis for on a mega ship. And that's what these areas are supposed to be. And I think with this Vibe Beach Club on Norwegian Joy, it certainly delivered.
I do love that elevated experience over in Vibe. And then along those lines, the Haven also on this ship, were any changes made in the Haven area?
The Haven area has they had a few new suites. They changed the owner suite into a 3-bedroom suite. One thing that, some people who go into the Haven are a little disappointed. They're like, wait a minute, there's a lot of families in here. And my answer to them is, of course there are, because the Haven does a really good job of offering true suites at sea. Those true 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and now a 3-bedroom suite. So that if you are a family, it kind of makes, and you're looking, you have the means to sort of have an elevated experience. The Haven's a great choice for you because you just have such a wide variety of suites available to you.
The Haven experience on NCL, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to do the actually full MSC Yacht Club one yet, so I can only speak on the Haven. And wow, I was so impressed back when I did it on Norwegian Getaway. I was lucky enough, my friend had a ton of future cruise credit, and he booked this massive room, and he's like, you'll have your own side of the cabin, your own bathroom, your own bedroom, you'll have the butler, all that stuff. I was like, okay, sure, I'm not going to say no to that. So impressed, and I guess even more so impressed with like the concierge. She does a lot more for you than I ever even imagined could do. And the outside space, especially your own Haven retreat or whatever they call it out there, the sun deck, the restaurants, the lounges in there, just everything was just top notch, chef's kiss.
Yeah, and what I really liked about, because the ship was nice enough to give me some Haven access because I had friends that came on this and they had booked the Haven. What I really thought the value in the Haven was, particularly on a ship this large, which, sailing with like almost 4,400 people, was the priority access that you got everywhere. The shows you need reservations for, but we were able to kind of march right down with our, Haven concierge and the sign to get great seats for the show. And in Bermuda, Norwegian has a complimentary ferry that goes to St. George. And we were able to go to the head of that line for that ferry because it really fills up. And we were able to get great seats on the ferry. When you came off the ship, you had special elevator that would take you upstairs. And even, to the point of getting off the ship, they brought us to a special elevator to get down. And we were just able to go right to the front of the line to get off the ship. I mean, I thought honestly that when you've got a ship that's that large with that many places that you need to have reservations and that kind of thing, the concierge service and having those priority embarkation and debarkation type of things, really that's what makes the difference.
NCL, the past couple of years, has made some decisions as far as onboard programming, which involved changing their strategy from all these Broadway shows that they had to kind of more in-house entertainment. So I want to speak on what you thought of that and other entertainment areas around the ship that may have been notable.
Yeah, I mean, this is one area where I have to say it fell a little short of my expectations because I had always seen Norwegian as, really a leader in entertainment. Mm-hmm. I'd always had good experiences with lots of nightlife, lots of great bands, really good shows, that sort of thing. And I did think that Norwegian Joy, I really missed the Broadway show on this one, which was Footloose before. And now Footloose is no longer on board. They have a show on board called Elements. It's more, there's no singing and dancing in it, really. It's a lot of dancing and aerobatics, I guess, acrobatics sort of thing, and aerialists and magicians. It's not really... almost like what you would expect to see maybe on Celebrity, not really on a more stream ship like Norwegian. And it seemed like people were a little unenthused with that, as was I. And I just kept thinking how the energy coming out of that theater would have been so much better coming out of Footloose than it was coming out of Elements. So I do think that there's a lack there. I mean, I know why we know why Norwegian did it, and they've been public about the fact they cut down the entertainment because those Broadway shows, they took up many crew cabins and even beyond the crew cabins to have that many entertainers on board. And now they're not, they cut into like guest revenue to have that kind of show on board. And so that's one reason why they cut it down. That being said, I missed it. And I think some other people that have been on Norwegian before probably did. Now, people who are new to the brand might not know that was really there before, so they might not miss it. They leaned pretty heavily on their Beatles tribute band, which was good. They had them kind of do double duty. They played in the Cavern Club, which is a very small little nightclub area. And then they also played on the main stage a few nights. So they kind of smartly, I guess, because the Cavern Club is small and not everybody could get in to see them. So they kind of smartly took that act and then put it on the big stage so that, more people could see it. But there again, that's also a cost savings to have one band be in more than one place.
Yeah, I get you there. How was the nightlife?
One thing that Norwegian does do really well, though, and I bet that other lines would be really jealous if they saw it. I couldn't believe how many people were out partying at their theme parties, because I know that you've been to you've been to a lot of theme parties in your life, and I have too. And a lot of times they're kind of lame, where the crowd is not into it, where you're like, is this really a party? What is this? The Glow Party on Norwegian Joy was a party, like with a capital P. I mean, it was lit. And there were a lot of people who, a lot of the people in that young 20s age group, there were quite a few of them on board, and they were really into it. They were dancing, they were like waving the glow sticks around. It was genuine, and that was kind of neat to see. And a lot of, I think, cruise lines wish they had that amount of energy from 20 somethings on board, but here they really had it. And that was really cool to see.
So a subjective question, who actually makes the theme parties on this ship? Is it the DJ, the cruise director, the passengers on board? I
think it was the DJ. He was a really good DJ, and he really got the crowd going. And I think, again, like there were a couple different theme parties that, sort of aimed at the different demographics. The Glow Party was definitely more that young 20 something. And they had an 80s party, they had a 90s party, and those were really well attended too. And those people were really into them. And I think that was part of it, was the DJ and really kind of segmenting, like, this is really the music that this demo wants to hear.
To wrap this up, Chris, give me your final thoughts of the latest refurbishment of Norwegian Joy.
I think that Norwegian did a lot of the refurbishment was really interesting because it shows where they really are able to make some money. But I loved the new areas. I thought both the Thermal Suite and the Vibe Beach Club are fantastic additions, particularly, again, if you're someone who's traveling without children, because both of those spaces are aimed at people 18 plus. So I thought the refurbs were really smart. Norwegian Joy in general, it's kind of a workhorse of the Norwegian fleet. They're sending it to 4 different home ports in the next 2 years. So they really need a ship here that's going to kind of work in any kind of climate. And I think it does. The only caution I would have is that if you're expecting that very traditional pool experience, or you really like that's important to you, it's probably not the ship for you. But other than that, it takes a lot of the features of Norwegian's Breakaway class, Breakaway Plus class, and they've done a great job.
If you want to see more photos of Norwegian Joy and those new additions that were added earlier this year, you can check the article out on cruisecritic.com. I'll also link to it in the show notes at cruiseradio.net. Chris Gray Faust, executive editor at cruisecritic.com. As always, good talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
All right, Dougie, let's see what we got for you, buddy. Cruise Radio is produced at the tripinsurance.com studios in Jacksonville, Florida. Get cruise news, ship reviews, and money-saving tips every Thursday on Cruise Radio. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show. If you want to help spread the word, give Cruise Radio a 5-star review. Find Cruise Radio where you listen to your favorite podcast or online at cruiseradio.net. I'm your announcer,